What's going on, YouTube? So this video is pretty similar to Patrick's video where he's talking about all of his projects, but in this case we're going over all of the web development curriculum that he's had, and he's going to talk about each section from start to finish and what he thinks that you should focus on if you go to Lambda school, and things that he thinks they should modify, like he preferred they could learn SAS instead of less, and just little things like that. So the core concepts that were really important to him, the things that he struggled with, the things that he thinks you should put emphasis on and that the teacher should put more emphasis on. Just a breakdown, a complete review of the web development curriculum so far in Patrick's experience. It's to showcase, I assume that if you're watching this video, you might be trying to find some research about it, Lambda School, and I try to ask the questions or make videos that give answers to the questions that I would be Googling myself. Patrick, if you don't know who he is a student at Lambda School. He's been going there from start to finish. I've been shadowing his experience since the very first day, and I'll continue shadowing the experience until the end and until he gets a job, and then we'll probably check in on him again. If you're interested in Lambda School, there's a link in the description. If you click that link and you sign up with it, you get $250 when you graduate Lambda School, and it helps support the channel. If you'd like to ask me or Patrick any questions, there's a link for the Discord, which is where we're always hanging out and chatting, also in the description. Shout out to all the patrons that support the channel: Armand, Craig, DJ Richie, Dave, Kyle, Aubrey. Appreciate all you guys. If you've ever considered supporting someone on the internet, a YouTuber for example, maybe consider me next time if I've helped you out. Other than that, I hope you enjoyed the video. Alright, so we're going to take a look at the entire toolkit curriculum. You don't have to go to the GitHub. I don't know if we're allowed to do that, so it's better safe. Hi, Mom. We have to look at the toolkit, skip the GitHubs, but just go over like what exactly the purpose of each piece of that toolkit was.
Week 1, Introduction to User Interface in Git. We saw that earlier in the previous video or next video, depending on how you upload these. This is what we saw when I was doing that user interface, the first one we showed in my projects, and we also talked about Git. But basically, as you saw, we had a breakdown of each day here. So you have day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, right? And then this is Fridays, which is our sprint challenges. And when you click on them, you go into more in-depth. So you have like your videos, and you have sometimes optional videos that you can go and check. But like this stuff, like week 1 through week 4, week 5's pretty much like on the dot. When we got into advanced CSS for responsive design for pre-processing, we learned less. I kind of wish we learned SAS, because SAS seems to be more used in my area, but from what we've been told, less and SAS are basically the same exact thing. So, I mean, I guess it's more of a nitpick than it is like a critique, but that's just me. When we got into JavaScript, I'll tell you this: if you barely did anything beyond pre-coursework for JavaScript, I mean, even though the pre-coursework for Lambda is really good, if you don't practice that stuff, when you go into JavaScript fundamentals, man, you get hit like a brick wall. That stuff is like, make sure you have that stuff solid. Typically, Mondays and Wednesdays are the bigger chunks, and then Tuesdays and Thursdays are breaking down what you learned the previous day in more depth. For instance, Wednesday of that time, we got into this keyword and how that works. But I would tell you this, like, remember this stuff very well, at least into the applied JavaScript stuff. Applied JavaScript, we talked about the DOM, we talked about components. Components are the first step into when we start to see things like we'll see in React. Highly recommend you pay attention 120% in everything in this module. For anyone who's looking into like Lambda and their single question is, what should I be doing to prepare for Lambda? Besides pre-course work, make sure your JavaScript is down pat. And then we have Project Week, which was user interface. And that is the SJ&W website architect that I showed you guys.
SJW?
Oh no! Okay, hold on. Let's restart that. You have to cut that. That's bad. Okay. That is horrendous. Okay. Basically, that's the Project Week where we take everything from week 1 to week 4, and we apply it in a big project. All 5 days. Well, so 4 days. So you get, during your project week, you actually get that Friday off. So you have Monday through Thursday to finish and show off your project. You invite your PM to see your Trello board so he can see what you're working on. You need to be making at least 3 to 4 commits a day before you do a push. And yeah, so just make sure you're on top of that kind of stuff. Make sure you have your Git flow down. Make sure you understand, your Trello boards and how to use them. I mean, they'll go over that stuff, but just, keep on top of it. And then we move into React. This week is when we saw things like Star Wars, pulling in from an API. We didn't have to worry about the part with the API. We just had to make sure that we loaded things in the state, breaking down your components, which is what functional components were. Pure UI stuff, don't have to worry about state at this point. Then when we got into class components, that's when we started seeing things like state, props, and how to move them around, and how the differences between the virtual DOM and the regular DOM, and why React is important because of that. And then we go into intermediate React, where we have things like tooling, using things like CRA boilerplate. We have the React lifecycle.
My favorite. Oh.
Your favorite.
Ask me anything.
Stuff.
Amen.
All right, ask you anything. Hey, Josh, can you tell us about the React lifecycle?
You mean like how to make an app from scratch? Because I got you. I definitely learned since that interview. It's definitely how to make an app from scratch. Nothing to do. It's just like, first you gotta.
But basically, you learn your React lifecycle, your initial, your mounting, your updating, and your unmounting, etc. Then we learned some things like patterns that you want to see in React. You learn things like the one component rule, where every component should do one thing and one thing only. And that's about organization and clean code. And I highly, highly recommend you follow that. It might be annoying to make new folders that you break down with only one JS file for the React. But trust me, that stuff is like when you get to bigger apps, that stuff is like a lifesaver. And then we learn about CSS and JavaScript. So you see things like React strap being used in there, how to apply them, how to change things, etc. And then we get into single page applications. So things like Facebook or Instagram. Basically, you use things like React Router so that you prevent page reloading, so that you keep things in state. And that's the idea behind single page applications, that you can click on things and they go to a new route, but you're not re-rendering the page.
You're literally just changing your URL bar.
Exactly.
And displaying different components.
It's basically saying, hey, go to this, but show something different. Display 0 everything else, and display 1 whatever I need.
And then your URL in the bar changes. That's it.
Right. So you have your React Router 1 and 2, and then you have your HTTP and AJAX stuff. This is the stuff that I would highly recommend you also focus in on during this week, especially with Router. Make sure you have that down pat, and make sure you have this down pat. If you guys were wondering about the part where I was just like, you know what, I quit. Well, no, actually that was second. That was Redux week, but this week was when I was kind of like flipping out. And then remember, and we saw the React Smurfs project that I was showing off, where we had React Router. You had the ability to add a Smurf and keep it persistent. Yeah. That was this one. And then we move into Redux week. So you have Redux being the state management that is considered a single source of truth for many large-scale applications and helps put back the MVC. Redux fundamentals 1 and 2. Talk about things like the Redux store and connecting it to your application, reducers, actions, updating state, and then you have things like async Redux, where we start to include things like thumb that allows us to use asynchronous calls to our APIs in Redux. This stuff is really good. I would highly suggest you learn how to use this. You're gonna have to do it for project week anyway, so just this part right here, besides the fundamentals, if there's anything I would make sure you double down on, it's this stuff. And then Redux Smurfs, which, like I said in the project video, it's just literally doing what we did in single page applications with that sprint challenge of Smurfs, but redoing it in Redux. Front end project week, woof, man, we're 10 weeks in at this point, guys. This is when we did Lambda Notes, which I showed earlier and I've showed in previous videos, but without the persistence. So you use everything you've learned from React to Redux and to put that into front end. We're done with project week. Congrats, you just did 10 weeks and you just nailed it, boys. Now we're going into RESTful web APIs with Express and Node.js. So you learn things like Node and using Express with pores. And if there's anything between these that I would suggest you make sure you understand, is your Express middleware and server-side routing. Now we're going to go into data persistence to web APIs. This is where we talk about things like relational databases, SQLs. Before we got into SQL, though, what we were told was they were learning MongoDB, but because of the way that the industry is working right now, it seems like SQL is in higher demand. So we learned this, but we did get access to the previous MongoDB lectures for previous cohorts. So I've gone back and watched that stuff, and it's interesting. It's interesting to see the differences between non-relational and relational database. And then we get into querying data, migrations, and seeding. Highly, highly, highly recommend you remember this stuff. They may push it off like it's not nearly as important as the rest of it, but seeding and migrations are a good way for you to keep version control over your database. For those who might not know, migrations are a way for you to add tables or roll back changes you've added to your database, and it's good for backend developers to keep track and see where the database has evolved over time. And then the seeding is using test data for those migrations to put into your database to make sure that everything is working correctly. And then we talk about introduction to data modeling. So you talk about things like one-to-one many relationships, many-to-many relationships, one-to-many relationships, and then normalizing the model. Nothing big here, just kind of a little bit of everything we talked about here. Then we get into authentication. Oof. This is where we start learning things like bcrypt, sessions and cookies, and JSON web tokens.
Basically logging in and out.
Exactly. I would just recommend that you learn, you use third parties because they have like the highest levels of encryption. But if we wanted to, we have things like bcrypt, and those are pretty good as well. And then we get into testing week. So we talk about things like automated testing, writing testing scripts to test our API, to test our React app, and to test our backend. I enjoy Jest, but a lot of people say that there are other ones out there that are better. I haven't used them personally, but this is what they teach us. It gets really annoying and really repetitive, but if you're into that kind of thing, then like, man, you'll love that. And then you have testing web APIs. That's not too bad. We learned about TDD, implementation of API with adequate code, the kind of gotchas that happen, and finally, we get to the backend project week. That's where we take everything from building RESTful web APIs to testing. We don't actually do testing. It's actually a stretch for this, but I would do it because it's pretty cool to see that people are actually following through with that. And this is basically you take your Lambda Notes front end and you create a back end in SQLite 3 using your web APIs and JSON web tokens to authorize the user. And you create this big application to make sure that everything is working and data persistence is there. We talked about it. I've shown it off, so I'm not going to kind of go into it. So hopefully that was informative and awesome for you guys to see. You might think that you don't know anything. You might think that this field isn't for you. You might think that you're too old to learn this stuff, but let me tell you something. There are tons of people out there that think the same thing and they're still doing it. Craig, old, but he's still learning. I'm 25, I only got my AS, but I'm still learning and I'm still applying and I'm still pushing. And I would suggest you guys do the same. You will be amazed what you can make if you push through the pressure and come out a diamond. Oh, and Craig's old. I just want to remind him.
Craig's old. Craig, you're old.
You're old, bro.